So really the purpose of today is to continue the conversation. I've had numerous conversations with the sheriff over the past few weeks, with the sheriff's team, obviously with you two folks at the COG meeting last week. And the intent here is to get out information that I think has been lacking and to dispel some of the misinformation. I think, Chief, you made a lot of heads kind of bend sideways at last week's meeting because this is something that has the potential to be very detrimental to public safety in LA County and potentially beyond that. But I think with the information that you shared, and once we get all of that accurate information out there, I think people will hopefully see that it may not be as bad as originally kind of thought, and that there may be some upside to the new PARP plan, and that it will give law enforcement the ability to hold folks that they didn't have the ability to hold in the past, right? Whether they could post bail or not. And so that's really the gist of it. So I wanted to get from, we have obviously members that are contract cities that contract 42 cities in LA County that contract with sheriff's department, and there's a whole bunch of the other 46 cities have their own police departments. So I wanted to make sure that we're covering both of those angles. We're up to 117 people, as you all can probably see. I'm expecting probably around 200 or so once we get to the meat of the conversation. So with that, I want to say first to everybody that's out there right now, welcome. This is the California Contract Cities Association's briefing through the sheriff and police chiefs and David Slayton from the LA courts. This is our attempt to get you as much information as we can over the next hour or two to make sure that you can take that to your residents. You can make informed decisions with the latest and greatest information and data. So I want to introduce the folks that we have today. We have the Sheriff's Department. We have Sheriff Luna with Jason Skeen, who's with them. And I'm sorry, I can't remember that. I know we have Sergio Loma, and I can't remember the young lady's name. One more time for me, Jason.
Chief Paula Tokar.
Chief Paula Tokar. I should have known that, but it was in an email. And then from my left to right, we have David Slayton, who's the Chief Executive of the LA County Courts, who was partially the architect for the PARP, which is a follow-on. It's not necessarily no bail, and I think that's kind of the first, a little bit of misconception or misnomer out there. It's not really no bail because there is a bail schedule that does have bail amount set for violent crimes. This is the follow-on to that. And then on the bottom, on my left, Chief Darren Arikawa from the Southgate Police Department, who is the Vice President of the LA County Police Chiefs Association. And finally, but definitely not least, Chief Scott Fairfield, who is the Bell Gardens Chief of Police and also the President of the LA County Police Chiefs Association. So I'm going to hand it over to you folks. I'm going to turn my camera off so nobody has to look at me. Sheriff, I'm going to let you go first, and then you can hand it off to the Chiefs or David as you see fit.
Thank you, Marcel. And I really appreciate your leadership and all the conversations that we've had. Marcel already introduced some of the key players here. I really appreciate the fact that all of you are taking this time to get on with us. Very important topic, but I gotta say it's in my opinion, a very misunderstood topic. So I'm gonna give some brief remarks, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Dave Slayton from the Superior Court. He is somebody who we have been working with behind the scenes with the Superior Court, and I haven't been around anybody who's as knowledgeable about this system as he is. So David, I really appreciate you being on with us and able to give your presentation and then answer a lot of clarifying questions. But before I do turn it over to Dave, just know that all of us, including the members of LA County Chiefs with Scott and Darren, we are working collectively and working very hard behind the scenes as well to make sure that at the end of the day, we're doing our best to provide public safety and try and keep people who shouldn't be on the street off the streets. And I think once you hear from Dave and understand a little bit more, you'll see that I believe, based on some early information that we have, that this is not as bad as most people thought. But I do want to comment, because even within our department, it's very much misunderstood. And one of the primary reasons it's misunderstood is because for us at the LA County Sheriff's Department and the members of the Los Angeles Police Department, we're under Urquady. That was a preliminary injunction that actually was zero bail. PARP comes along on October the 1st and modifies that. And I got to be honest with you, as your sheriff, I'm saying thank God it was modified, because what we were under Urquady, I believe that was negatively impacting public safety. Where I believe, again, based on early information, PARP is a significant. I'll just say it's an improvement from what we've seen with the early information. And remember, under Urquady, it took the sheriff's department and LAPD back to the emergency bail schedule that was set before COVID. And as of May 16th, we are back under it. Why does that impact all of you? Is because anybody who books prisoners at LA County Jail, it falls under the injunction that we were under, in a sense, meaning that we could not take your prisoners. So again, we are seeing an improvement thus far, but that could change. So with that, I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave. And again, Dave, thank you so much. But we're going to be right here because we want to be available to answer any questions that you may have. And again, I thank both Scott and Dave for being here, because they've been instrumental in us working with the Superior Court and others to try and get the best possible solution to a lot of the concerns that are coming up. And then we also have our custody experts from our department that can answer any questions as they come up. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for letting me be with you this afternoon. Believe me, we appreciate the opportunity to speak directly to the people who are dealing with the bail schedules every day. And hopefully you will leave, and other city leaders and others who are involved in it, hopefully by the time you leave today, you'll have a better understanding of what it is that's happening and even an early indication of how it's going. Marcel, I don't know if it's possible for you to enable screen sharing. I had a few slides I was going to show people, but until then, I'll maybe just jump into some of the discussion points.
You got it, David. David, give it a shot.
Okay, let me see if it'll work now. There we go. It's working. Okay, so hopefully you all can see my screen at this point. Just want to give you a couple of pieces of information as we get started here. And some of it's going to be really high level, and then I'm going to jump right into the details about how it's going so far. But of course, as you all know, the purpose of bail at the end of the day is to ensure that someone will appear back at court for their court appearances and to reduce the risk to public and victim safety. And that is the obligation that the judges of the Superior Court are required to do under the Constitution and the statutes that exist. So obviously the issue here is making sure that they're balancing all the different factors that they have to consider as part of that. And so when the Superior Court began looking at how to go about doing that, they really said they were really looking at, obviously we have a history of money bail in the past. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. We have a history of the emergency bail schedule during the pandemic. We have some history under Urquady. We have some history of the pilot program that the LA Superior Court participated in under Senate Bill 129, where we were doing risk assessments. And so based upon all that information, the court really endeavored to adopt a bail schedule, which we believe, and I hope you will believe by the end of this, really does improve public safety over any of the previous ways that we did bail before. So let's talk about first what hasn't changed. And I think this is really important. You may wish that this has changed by the time this is over, but what hasn't changed is that offenses which are defined by Penal Code 1270.1 as serious and violent offenses, and those are defined by the legislature. You may or may not agree that those are serious and violent, or you may not agree that those that are not serious and not violent by statute should fall in different categories. But basically, under the statute, there are certain offenses, things such as domestic violence, murder, rape, smash and grab robberies. Those type of offenses are defined as serious and violent offenses. And individuals who are arrested for those under the bail schedules by statute have to have a money bail amount set for those offenses. So if you go through the bail schedules that were adopted in July, that became effective on October 1st, there's still money bail amounts associated with those serious and violent offenses. What that means is that individuals who are booked on those offenses, the decision about whether or not those individuals remain in jail is not based upon their individual risk. It's based upon whether or not they have the money to get out or not. So a first-time offender charged with robbery, for instance, will have a certain amount, and the person who's done it 50 times before and been convicted 50 times of that would, who is arrested and booked on that, would have the exact same bail amount. So it really is all about whether or not they have the money to make that bail amount. So the early data is that about 48% of all bookings in the first 2 weeks of October were these money bail offenses. So serious and violent offenses across the county. This is countywide data. 48% of those were in that serious and violent money bail offenses. Of course, you're going to see a counter to this in a second, but of those money bail bookings, 0% of those people were assessed for their individual risk. Again, really all it was looking at is whether or not they had money to get out. So let's talk a little bit about what has changed. The Pre-Arraignment Release Protocol, PARP, as everyone's calling it. I appreciate the sheriff saying earlier that this is not zero bail or no bail or $0 bail. We've been pretty clear all along that is an old system. This is not that. So we appreciate you all passing that along to your constituents, because we believe it's dangerous to be telling the public that there are no consequences and no accountability, when in fact the system, I think you'll find by the end, increases the accountability of individuals who are booked and who have histories. So the Pre-Arraignment Release Protocol, or PARPs, as we call them, apply to all of the other offenses, everything that is not defined as a serious and violent offense in the statute. So non-1270.1s, as we call them, and that's referring to the penal code section. So how do we determine what the bail amount should be for those individuals? And basically that is based upon the conditions of release that are based upon a review of the individual and their individual risk of public and victim safety and likelihood of return to court. You'll see in a second kind of what that looks like, but if someone is found to be a high risk to the public safety, or high risk of victim safety, or high risk of not returning to court, their bail is going to look very different than someone who might be a first-time offender, who is maybe not as high of a risk based upon their offense and the other factors. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So this is done regardless of their wealth. So an individual who is high risk is not able to bail out with any amount of money. They can have the most money in the world. They could be a millionaire, but if they're a high risk, they won't be getting out. But at the same time, individuals who don't have money, who might otherwise have previously been held just because they couldn't afford some monetary amount if they were low risk, those individuals also will not be detained simply because they don't have wealth. This has nothing to do with the amount of money they have. It's all about risk. So when do the protocols apply? They apply in the period between booking and arraignment. So this is really important. The arresting side, you see at the beginning of that, nothing has changed about the law enforcement's discretion to decide when to actually take someone and book them, or when to cite and release them in the field. Historically in LA County, a lot of people have been cited and released in the field because law enforcement uses that discretion to decide when to take them into the station and book them. Nothing has changed with that. Law enforcement still has that discretion to do that. When they are booked into jail, that's when the pre-arraignment release protocols go into effect. And those stay in effect until arraignment. At arraignment, you'll see this over and over in my slides today. At arraignment, the judge who's hearing that case, when there's a prosecutor present, public defender present, the defendant present at that point, and more information about the case is known, the judge has the opportunity to use all the tools they previously had available to them. But what the pre-arraignment release protocols do is it provides additional tools for the magistrate's pre-arraignment. So once someone's booked, that's what we're talking about here. So in the bail schedules, in the PARPs, there's basically two basic types of options available for these non-serious, non-violent, non-1270.1 offenses. Cite and release, or book and release, which, to be honest, at the end of the day, is really the same thing. So once someone's booked, doesn't matter whether it's a CR or BR offense, basically they're treated the same. In those situations, that individual's bail amount is $0, but they also have some conditions that are assigned to them. So it's different than what it was under the EBS or KEDI. There are some conditions that are assessed upon them, which are returned to court and some other things. But for the most part, that's what that looks like. The other option is magistrate review. So in magistrate review, this is where an individualized determination of that person's risk is occurring to see what are the appropriate conditions, if any, to release them from jail. I know there's a question that was asked about this, so I'm going to answer it right here, which is, what is the bail amount for magistrate review? And the easiest way for you all to understand this is $0 plus conditions. So I know some people have asked, well, can we continue to hold people who are MRs because their bail amount is $0? But let me be clear, the Superior Court's policy is those are $0 plus conditions. And so until you hear from the magistrate about what those conditions are, you should, under at least the Superior Court's bail schedule, there's no authority or responsibility for you to release that person. If you all choose to do that as law enforcement agencies under your own policies and authority, that's up to you. But from the perspective of the Superior Court, any individual who's under MR is eligible to be held on until you hear from us about what those conditions are. So it's really all about conditions, really not about the money anymore. So let me give you a little stats again from the first 2 weeks. 22% of all people who've been booked into jail are people who've been booked in on that CR or BR category. And so those are obviously a number of those offenses. 30% of the people who've been booked into jail are in that magistrate review category. So the more of those people than not. And ultimately, there's a option, which you're going to see in a second, where any CR or BR offense can be escalated or elevated to an MR. So the way this happens is that law enforcement can make a call to probation, just as they've always been able to do. Nothing changes here. That operates 24/7. They can make a call to probation and ask for enhanced review, or what we would call in the past bail deviation. And the magistrate will take a look at that information, and they'll go through magistrate review just like any other magistrate review would happen. So law enforcement has options there. So you don't have to do just book and release if you don't want. Those can be magistrate reviews as well, if you find that that person is an enhanced risk of public safety or enhanced risk of failure to appear. What we've seen is that's happened in about 3% of the cases. So law enforcement is not availing themselves of that very often, but when they have, the magistrates have done the job to review that. I will tell you just a point worth noting here is that in all but one of those magistrate review cases, those individuals have been held for arraignment without the opportunity to bail out, because the magistrate found that there were no conditions that were available for that person to be released safely into the community. What that means altogether is that about 64% of all the bookings that happened the first 2 weeks of October under the PARP were assessed by the magistrate for their risk. So almost 2/3 of all of them being going before a magistrate for that risk. Just as a reminder, that has never happened before under money bail or under EBS or under ARKIDI. There was no individualized risk determination happening. It was simply based upon whether or not someone had access to money or not, regardless of their risk. Let's talk a little bit about that 3% in the middle there. How do you get someone from the CR, BR category to the MR category? And it's really through three things we call exceptions, enhancements, and bail deviation. In the bail schedule, there are 3 exceptions, and I'll just put a big asterisk around the first one here because it's new as of yesterday, and we've not even told you about this. It just got adopted by the executive committee yesterday, got added. But the exceptions are if someone is on felony probation, that's new, parole or post-release community supervision is what we refer to as an exception. And what that means is that person cannot be a BR or CR. They are automatically an MR. So every time someone's on probation, felony probation, parole, or post-release community supervision, they are to go before the magistrate for review. The second thing is if there are enhancements. We've always had in our bail schedule sentencing enhancements available for law enforcement to look at. So this might be things such as the activity was done for the benefit of a gang, street gang, or the person has a pending felony case already. And what these do is they add money. And so the way the bail schedule works is if there is an enhancement that's available, law enforcement can allege that enhancement and that either creates money where there was not money before. So a CR or BR offense would now be 20 or 30,000, or it enhances it to an MR, and the bail schedule lays that out. I would just remind everybody, especially in law enforcement, you have the option to figure out how to do this. You may choose that it doesn't make sense to go to money bail, because if the money bail offense results in a bail amount of say 10 or 20,000, that person may or may not get out, versus that person going to MR review as they might otherwise go. So obviously that's up to you all and your discretion as to how you want to handle that. The last one of these three is bail deviation. And again, I just mentioned that a second ago. This is where anytime a law enforcement officer 24/7 feels that there is an enhanced risk to public safety or enhanced risk of flight, not appearing in court, they can request a magistrate to review that on CR or BR offenses. And that basically makes it to where they're held until the magistrate has that review. That's happened, like I said, only 3% of the time. So just make sure that you all know that that's optional and out there. And the phone numbers for that are in the bail schedule. So what happens at magistrate review when these cases go before the magistrate, either because they're MR offenses or because they've been enhanced review by the request from a law enforcement officer or agency? The magistrate reviews that individual based upon several risk factors. It includes what's their current offense. You're going to see what this looks like in just a second, but it's what their current offense is, as well as their criminal history and previous failures to appear. So what's their pending case that they've been arrested on this time? What other pending cases do they have? What other convictions do they have? What other sentences do they have? What other failures to appear do they have? All that information is available to them. There is nothing in that review that is based on financial means. So it's not about whether or not they can make a certain amount of money. It's whether or not their risk makes it where they can be safely released under conditions into the community, or there are not conditions that would allow them to be released safe in the community. Ultimately, if the magistrate finds that there are conditions, they will issue those non-financial conditions. It's not money. It's really more based upon prohibiting them from certain conduct, prohibiting from certain contacts, requiring them to do check-ins or call-ins, those type of things, different conditions which might be made available to them. So I'm showing you a redacted look at what the magistrates have, and I just randomly picked this one. This was a decision that was made just a couple of days ago. This is an individual who was arrested for PC 29800A1, which I think, if I looked it up right, is unlawful carrying of a weapon by a felon. And so you can see over on the left-hand side of the screen, I just wanted to kind of point out for you what this looks like. The failure to appear score, out of a scale of 6, this person is a 6. And if you look in the middle of the second page, you might see why. New criminal activity, out of a scale of 6, this person is a 6. And the third thing over here, NVCA, stands for new violent criminal activity. Out of a scale of 6, that person is a 4. So overall, pretty risky person on the risk assessment score. If you look at the bottom, you can kind of see why. These are the various factors which go into determining what the risk is. This is a validated risk assessment from Los Angeles County. It's been validated here as well as around the country to predict future criminal activity or future failures to appear. You can see what how the scores come in on the bottom part of the left side of the screen. On the middle of the screen, you'll see the current charge, that 29800. You can see the pending cases they have. Looks like a couple of drug offenses. They've got quite a few prior convictions, and then several prior sentences, all available here for the magistrate to see. And then over on the right side of the screen, you'll see the number of failures to appear that this individual has had. All of these in LA County alone. Probation provides for the magistrates a look at all out-of-county, out-of-state arrests, convictions, failures to appear, sentences, that type of information. But this information is what's available to the magistrate when they're making a decision. If law enforcement were to provide additional information by calling probation, for instance, for an enhanced review or whatever, that information would also be made available to the magistrate in addition to this. You can see on the left-hand side what the decision was by the magistrate, which is that this person would be temporarily held until arraignment to protect victim and public safety, ensure the arrestee's appearance at trial, and that based upon the facts and risk assessment that was known to them prior to arraignment, there does not appear to be a less restrictive alternative prior to arraignment. And so because of that, the individual was held for pending arraignment, temporarily held for arraignment. And at that point, then the judge who is doing the arraignment has the opportunity to make that decision about how to release them if they need to. We'll show you the other side of the coin, which is an individual who was also booked a couple of days ago. This is a person who was ordered conditionally released. Again, I didn't intentionally try to pick a certain one. I just found a conditional release and pulled up the score. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this person's an FTA score of 1 out of 6, at the lowest you can be. NCA, 1 out of 6, lowest you can be. New violent criminal activity, lowest you can be, 0 out of 6. You can see that this person was arrested, I believe, 23152 as a DUI. No pending cases, no prior convictions, no prior sentences, no previous failures to appear. Looks like their first contact with the court system. And so this person was conditionally released and ordered to have several conditions available to them. So that's kind of what the magistrates have available to them. Again, if law enforcement provides additional information, that's also made available to them at the time of the decision. So what has happened at magistrate review? What's the actual outcomes? So this is, again, looking at the first 2 weeks of data. We'll be looking at this over the next couple of weeks and putting more information out. We continue to, the sheriff has seen this, Chief Fairfield, others have seen it. It just keeps getting updated as we have more data, although it's not shifting much. About 33% of the people who've been reviewed by the magistrate have been ordered released on conditions. With a big asterisk, 29% of those 33% had already been released by the law enforcement at the time of the order. So this is an MR offense where they would typically be held until the magistrate tells you otherwise. But by the time the magistrate, which was usually within a couple of hours of the booking, by the time the magistrate had issued that order, when probation went to send that to the law enforcement agency, they were informed by the law enforcement agency that the person had already been released by the law enforcement agency. So that's a decision you all get to make as law enforcement agencies. But those are people that otherwise you all released them before the magistrate was able to complete their review. 1% of people were released on their own recognizance, or OR, the typical thing that's always been around. But 65% of the people who were reviewed by the magistrate were temporarily held for further review at arraignment. Well, again, finding that there was no less restrictive alternatives prior to arraignment that would allow them to be safely released from the community as they went out. So how are they going? How are the decisions being made? Obviously, there's a lot of information that the magistrates are using. You saw some of that. Risk scores are one of them. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an indication of kind of how risk is playing out across the categories. So these are looking, again, only at people booked. And this is really important. We don't have any information about people that are being cited and released in the field by law enforcement. But of the people being booked into jail, for those that were booked on offenses which would be serious and violent and therefore eligible for money bail, 52% of those people who were eligible for money bail had a medium to high risk score. So those are individuals who, based upon their access to money, were either out or in. But again, 52% of those in that moderate, medium to high risk score. Of those who were ordered released by the magistrate, 85% of them had a low risk score. So that would be a 1 or 2 on the risk scores. Of those who were temporarily held until arraignment, because there were no way to safely release them in the community, nothing available to the magistrate, 77% of those people who were temporarily held had a medium to high risk score. So that sort of shows you how this is at least sorting out currently. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I believe only one person where law enforcement provided additional information and asked for that enhanced bail review, only one person has been released. And I know, because I looked at that one, that one of the reasons why is because the law enforcement officer's information provided was this person is charged with X, which of course the magistrate already knew, with no additional information provided about why that person was an enhanced risk. 1269C of the Penal Code does require facts to be provided by a law enforcement officer as to why that person is an enhanced risk. So that person was released, but otherwise they have all been held based upon the magistrate's review. The last thing I want to show you, and I know this is an issue that people ask about a lot, and there's a lot of misinformation out there, so of course we're tracking it, which is what about rebookings? What about people who get out and then commit a new offense? And there have been about 3,000 bookings in the first 2 weeks in LA County. 57 of those individuals who were booked into jail ended up being rebooked. I spoke to someone about this morning, and they said, well, what about the people who we didn't book? Well, we don't know about those people. So if you're citing and releasing them and then they're getting booked, we wouldn't know that. So these are people who were booked, fingerprinted, and then booked again. So 57 people across the county were rebooked in the first 2 weeks. 52 of those individuals were booked 2 times during that 2-week period. 4 people were booked 3 times in that 2-week period, and 1 person was booked 4 times in that 2-week period. So I thought I would just, obviously we could go through all of these individually, but I thought I'd give you a little bit more information about a couple of these. The person who was booked 4 times, but might be the one you're thinking about, I have the information on that person. The person was originally arrested for shoplifting, booked for shoplifting and lewd conduct, booked and released, then was booked on lewd conduct, booked and released, lewd conduct, booked and released, lewd conduct. So that was the history of that individual. There was never a call to the magistrate to ask for enhanced review on that. That was just someone being booked and released every time. One of the examples of a person who was arrested 3 times or more during that 2-week period was an example of a violation of a protective order 3 times over 8 days, every time that person bonded out on money bail, because that's a money bail offense. And then I looked just a couple of these under the 2 times, a couple of them bonded out on money bail on assault with a deadly weapon and had 2 arrests within that 2-week period. So these are sort of all over the place, but a couple of things I think that are key information is almost half of those people who were booked out and then were rebooked with that 2 period were booked out and released on money bail. Again, no consideration of that individual's risk when that happens. But none of those where a magistrate reviewed them and ordered them released were rebooked, at least not yet. We're obviously going to keep watching. It's really early. As the sheriff said, we're continuing to watch this information. But at least so far, it appears to us that the goal of the court to try to improve public safety, victim safety, and make sure people show up to court, which is indeed the judge's constitutional and statutory responsibility, appears to be working, because the data at least shows that it appears that those individuals are not recommitting new offenses, and that individuals who perhaps impose a greater risk of public safety where there's really no safe way to release them pre-arraignment, that's working, and that those who otherwise are a low risk appear to be being released into the community safely without reoffending. So with that, I think we have maybe a couple of questions, and there may be other comments from other members, but I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Real quick, Marcel, I just wanted to see if either Darren or Scott had any comments to add after Dave's presentation.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the COG meeting, the system is working better than we thought. I think the biggest issue the chiefs have, and I have, is that a lot of this onus falls on the police officers again, or the police departments, and when they're already overworked, I think that's why we get to that 3% number when we definitely should be at a higher number. I think there's a lot of room in there for error, and a way to address that would be to make some of these crimes that are BRs to sit down and go through the list pretty thoroughly, and as a group come up with some other crimes that we probably need to make go directly to MR, because like we talked about, the potential for a mistake could end with horrible results, and we should make the system as easy or user-friendly as possible. And I think by taking some of these crimes, especially the crimes that are impacting our communities right now with the retail theft and some of the other stuff that we've talked about before, instead of being book and release, make them mandatory or magistrate reviews right off the bat.
Chief Arikawa, do you have anything else to add?
The only thing that I'll add with Scott is we had a couple of chiefs just voice some questions really about procedurally. I know Scott mentioned it, but some of these offenses really need to be looked at again. And then there's so many little things in between the process that is somewhat confusing. So I think just procedurally, that is a comment from the chiefs, is that getting everybody on the same page to get this right the first time is the biggest struggle with us.
So David, we're going to go through the questions. We have a few questions that we got prior to the briefing today, but on the question from the chiefs, has there been work? Has the sheriff have you been meeting with Chief Moore, Sheriff Luna, or anyone to look at sort of what is listed out in the bail schedule as, you know, CRs and BRs, and is there a possibility that those can get changed to automatic magistrate reviews? Is that something that you guys are working on?
You know, the court, when the court first announced this in July, and when we first met with law enforcement, and I think we've all been consistent in continuing to say this, which is, you know, we are looking at this regularly. As you can see, we have a lot of data that we're using to really help inform the decisions. You know, looking at what's happening with people, looking at the individual's risk. You're going to see the change that was made that you're about to hear about this afternoon as law enforcement officers and agencies. There's continuing tweaks. So, for instance, res burglary with person present went from MR today MR to $50,000 bail. That may or may not make you happy, depending upon my presentation today, whether or not that makes sense or not to you. But that was a change that the executive committee has approved. So the bottom line is that the court is committed to continuing to look at this and, you know, listening and looking at the data and hearing from people. And, you know, nothing says that the bail committee and the executive committee of the court can't make changes as they are doing now. So bottom line is the answer to that is yes, changes can be made. You know, obviously we're trying to figure out what the right balance is there.
Okay, and
but I will say to Chief Fairfield's point, I hear you loud and clear. We tried really hard as part of this process to have as little impact on law enforcement as possible with regard to workload. So, for instance, there was some discussion at one point of should we, you know, open up a portal to where law enforcement goes in and enters the information themselves for bail deviation or enhanced magistrate review, whatever you want to call it. And we chose to just maintain the system we've always had. Bail deviation has always been, you call the probation number, 24/7 access available. You tell them what it is, and probation submits that information to the magistrate. We kept that. That's exactly the same. You know, so, you know, if you have a person that you all book into jail, you're doing the same thing you were doing before. Granted, before law enforcement wasn't using that. It was being done about 10 times a month on average. In the first 2 weeks, you all used it about 70 times. So it's obviously being used more, but we tried to keep the process the same. The really only difference from a workload perspective, from what law enforcement, as far as from the policy perspective, is that when someone is being released from jail on conditional release, they have to print off a conditional release order and get the person sign it. Otherwise, we tried to keep everything the same because we didn't want to have major impacts on the workload of law enforcement. So again, we're trying, you know, our hope is if you have some concerns about someone that you think is an enhanced risk of public safety or enhanced risk of failure to appear, place a call to probation. Have your officers let them know what that is. Probation will take it from you over the phone. If it's one of these offenses under the PARP, communicate that immediately to the law enforcement, to the magistrate. We're asking, as the bail schedule says, that you do that within 2 hours. That way we make sure we get it before that person is ultimately released from custody. So,
David, thanks. We spoke on that, and after I met with the folks in the COG, I contacted you and I asked what type of leeway there was there. Can you explain that?
Leeway with the 2 hours?
The 2 hours?
Yeah. So there's what's written in the policy, and then there's practice. We really encourage you, as the bail schedule says, to do that within 2 hours of booking. So remember, it's not 2 hours of arrest, but 2 hours within the time of booking is when 0 minutes starts at booking. And so again, please do it within 2 hours. That being said, our magistrates, it shows up in their queue for review at hour 4. So the reason why there's that couple of hours built in there is in case there's late information coming in from law enforcement at, say, hour 2 or maybe even 2 hours and 15 minutes. So if you don't get it in before 4 hours, there will be absolutely no way it can go before the magistrate, because that booking will have disappeared in a sense off of our technology from the queue. But again, please communicate to your law enforcement officers that we need this information within 2 hours, as it states in the bail schedule. But really, at the end of the day, the booking's not going to show up in the magistrate's queue for 4 hours. Hope that's helpful.
So if we make an arrest and we hold the individual and don't book them for an hour, or until the officer gets cleared from the call or the next call or the next call that they're on, the clock doesn't start ticking until we submit that booking.
That's correct. So the way someone asked this question in the chat, who creates the risk assessment seen by the judge? Basically, it's an automatic technology system that the court created, that as soon as someone is live scanned, as soon as they're fingerprinted at the booking station, that is automatically created. And so there's no person in the background creating that. It's based upon data we have available in the systems that we have. And so, as Chief Fairfield just mentioned, as soon as those fingerprints are laid down on the live scan and that information hits the system, that's when the clock starts ticking. It's up to you all when you do that. I'm not going to opine as to when that's supposed to happen or when it's not, but basically that's when the time will start ticking from our perspective. And you have 4 hours from that time, 2 hours from the time by the schedule, and 4 hours before it goes for the magistrate.
Thanks, David. Sheriff, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't disagree with what Scott and Derek talked about, but I just want everyone on the call to know that the presiding judge and staff, including David, have made themselves available for several meetings. So when this whole thing started, we were very concerned about several crimes that were not under magistrate review, like stolen cars and burglaries. So they've been flexible in some, and there's some disagreement on some others. But I'm very confident that we all have an open door, and we're being heard. So for anybody on the call, making sure that you do communicate with your police chiefs, if it's under contract with us, our captains, because if there's something or a problem that we're seeing, bring it to our attention, and we have the court's ears.
Thanks, Sheriff. Okay, we're going to go through these questions. There's quite a few that are adding up. And so the first one is that this is received prior. This is from one of the lieutenants over at the Carson station. Does the magistrate set bail for all of the magistrate review bail increase requests?
Yes, absolutely. So every case that goes for magistrate review, whether it's MR in the schedule or it's enhanced because of a request from law enforcement, a magistrate looks at those individually, makes an individualized look at the risk, and then decides what the bail should be. And I just want to be clear, because there's a little confusion here on this. It's $0 bail plus conditions. So just because you see that $0 bail, we're not going to put money on this, because the court has made the decision that is not a good predictor of whether or not someone should be in or not. It's the conditions that are important. I know there's another question in here about how long someone can be held on the magistrate review. We are from our perspective, the court's perspective. You all can do what you want with your own policies internally about holding people, but from our perspective, the person should be held until the magistrate orders them released, and so that could be up until arraignment. So what happens is the magistrate will, if they decide that they can be safely released in the community, and that, say, 33% of the cases I mentioned to you earlier, they will issue a conditional release order. Probation will send you a teletype that says the magistrate has ordered this person conditionally released, and you go into the prep portal. Your jail staff go in the prep portal. They get the conditional release order. Tells them, get the defendant to sign the arrestee to sign that, and then they're released. But until you hear from that, if it's an MR offense or one that's been enhanced review, there's no obligation from the court's perspective under the bail schedule for you to release that individual. In fact, the bail schedule would indicate you should continue to hold them.
Great. Okay, the next question is along the same lines from the same lieutenant out at Carson. What is the bail if the charge is marked as magistrate review in the bail schedule?
Yeah, so again, thanks, good question. $0 plus conditions. So I know there's been a little bit confusion on this. It's really important for you and everyone to understand, because I had a conversation this morning with someone who looked at an MR and said, "Oh, that's just book and release." No, it's not book and release. It's you got to wait for the magistrate to tell you what the conditions are, where that person could be safely released, or where the magistrate says, yeah, there's no conditions under which we believe this person can be safely released prior to arraignment. So the bail, there's not an amount per se, but it's conditions that are important. So until you hear about that, from our perspective, you're to hold them.
Okay, and then it's just more of a statement. It's kind of a question, but more of a statement. So they're asking, can one of you be ready to clearly go through? Can you give us some examples of non-serious, non-violent felonies and misdemeanors versus the serious and violent felonies and misdemeanors? It's always been a huge concern. And my kind of question to piggyback on that is, are those categorized that way because of Prop 4757 and AB 109, and what impact is that having on the bail schedule?
Well, as a person new to California, I don't know all those prop numbers, but I can tell you a couple of things. And that is that all the serious and violent offenses are defined by statute. So if you look in the bail schedule, every place where there's a money bail amount, that's a serious and violent offense as defined by statute. And then in the middle of the bail schedule, I'm looking at one right here in front of me. There's an indication S or V or S and V for serious and violent. And then the statute where the law declares that as a serious or violent offense. So every single one of those serious or violent offenses is defined by statute, and it has a money amount because the law currently requires us to do that. Every one where it's not a serious and violent offense would be what we would call non-serious, non-violent offenses. I understand people don't like that terminology, but from a legal statutory perspective, that's the way it is. And those are the ones that are subject to the risk review and subject to the pre-arraignment release protocol. So I know some of this question too was, asking, for instance, about whether or not someone who's charged with attempted rape is non-serious or non-violent because it wasn't a successful rape. If I understand the question right, rape is a serious or violent offense subject to $100,000 monetary bail amount, and attempt, I believe, is 664. And if you look in the bail schedule, it says that unless it's murder, the attempt is the same as this underlying substantive offense. So basically, on an attempted rape, it would be, the rape is 100,000, the bail would be 100,000. It does not become a BR or CR or MR just because it wasn't, quote unquote, a successful rape. It was an attempted rape. So the bail schedule lays that out, but hopefully that clarifies that question. But I would encourage you to take a look at the bail schedule. You can scroll through and look at all the ones where there are letters out to the right of it. Those would be what would be defined as not in the serious or violent offense categories. And then those where there's money bail amounts, those would be defined as serious and violent offenses by statute.
Thanks, David. Okay, the next question. If CR means cite and release at the time of arrest, how does law enforcement submit the case for MR? And does law enforcement have the ability to hold a person in jail while they submit? I think you kind of covered this a little bit before, but if you could elaborate.
Let me answer the first part of the question for sure, which is, let me be clear. I think there's some confusion out there about this as well. If it says CR in the bail schedule, there is nothing that limits a law enforcement officer's ability to book that person into jail. So I think people are reading that saying that you must cite and release, and that is not true. You all retain the discretion to book anyone you want to book. If you book that CR and you don't request enhanced review, the bail schedule would say that person's eligible for release under $0 bail with the basic conditions of appearing for court and not committing new offenses. And if you choose to cite and release them in the field that's your discretion, you can do that as well. But basically, that's how, if you want this case, a CR case, to go to the magistrate for review, you would need to book them. And then you would call probation and you would ask that person to be reviewed because of the fact that you believe they're enhanced risk to public safety or a flight. And the next question, does law enforcement have the ability to hold a person in jail while they submit for MR? Yes. Again, the bail schedule says you're to make that call within 2 hours. And as soon as you submit that probation, unless probation tells you otherwise that there's something wrong with that request, that information will go over to the magistrate and they'll make their review at hour 4. And so you can hold them The bail schedule would indicate you should hold them until you hear back from the magistrate.
Can I jump in here real quick? So we have a few examples of chiefs responding back over the last couple of days that they've had issues where they've been on hold for the bail deviation for up to an hour. We've had other issues that we don't need to air out here, but there needs to be some sort of portal or some sort of way that we can start sending these so we can fix the system. We've had a lot of issues with warrants where if a warrant is issued, we can't get an MR. There's been some things that have come up that we really don't have anywhere to reach out to. So we kind of need to come up with a system. If this is going to be what we have, and I know you guys are committed, and we've had numerous talks about making it the best system possible. But as each day goes by and these frustrations start to pile up, we're not going to make any ground. We're going to continue to sit here and argue. So we need a way that we can get these grievances or these issues addressed fairly quick and back to those agencies that had the issues.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you letting me know that. That's the first time I've heard about that. So, again, I think the sheriff and Chief Fairfield and others would say that we've been fairly available to hear any issues. So I would say that if you all would make sure we're aware of those, I'll look into the hold issue. I don't know why there would be a hold issue because there's only been 70 in the past 14 days, so that's not very many coming in a day. So I'll check and see what's going on if there's a reason why. I mean, it's probation, not controlled by the court, but I can at least do some inquiry as to why that might be the situation. But yeah, if you're having issues that are procedural, you may have issues with the bail schedule. I'm sure we're happy to hear that as well. But if you're having procedural issues where you're not able to get done what you need to get done or questions, please reach out to us. We want to try to make this, as the chief just said, make this work the best way it can.
All right, this next one's for this next one is to your earlier point, Chief Fairfield. It says if the arresting officer doesn't see the person as a threat and they're not charged with the level of crime that triggers it, why should a magistrate review? Prior to this, correct me if I'm wrong, the person would be able to pay the bail to release themselves without concern of risk. And this system is actually better, the PARP system. What is the risk of error and how is it greater here than before?
I'm assuming that question's to me because it's about what I stated. So I don't believe I ever stated that we're holding somebody that we consider not to be serious enough. What my statement was that some crimes that we do consider to be a public safety or what our communities are dealing with, such as retail theft and some of these other things that aren't automatically BRs, MRs. It's up to the officer to do that. And the officer has to do that within the 2 hours like we spoke about. Sometimes if there's a warrant, there's things that can happen in the system that then allows that individual to be released. If they were automatically MRs versus BRs and we have to request, they would automatically get reviewed. And that would eliminate a potential for an error to be made and that individual to get released back out. I don't know if that clarified it, but that's my answer. David, you might be able to.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I think obviously from the court's perspective, I know the comment was that the person would be able to have paid the bail earlier. Yes, someone who was really risky and someone who was not risky would have been able to pay the bail. And the court's perspective is on those where there is an enhanced risk, whether that's the offenses that are designated as MR or those where law enforcement asks for it to be a magistrate review, that we feel like the judges, take all the information they have available and consider that and determine what the appropriate way to release them safely in the community is. And we feel like that's a better system, as I think the questioner indicates. But it's not just like, well, we think these people should be able to pay money and get out. And so that sort of provides the issue too of, I don't think anyone here would say that the goal here is to try to keep people who just are poor in jail. I think everyone's trying to make sure the risky people are in jail and the people who are less risky are not, and to try to improve public safety. And so the goal there is to try to address those issues through this system.
Yeah, I kind of read it the same way, and I remember something you said last week at the COG meeting, Chief, was around that, saying that you now have the ability to hold someone, whereas otherwise you wouldn't have been able to hold them in the past, right? Like if they're a danger to the community, now you have a way to hold them, whereas before they would have just been given bail and they would have been back out. So I think that's a positive. Trying to look for all the positives and something that has been very challenging, I think, for a lot of folks. Okay, we're on the next question. You said MRs can be held until the police hear from the magistrate. Where is that stated in the schedule? How long can a BR be held if the officer requests MR? And where is the authority in the schedule for the officer to hold the CR while waiting 2 hours for MR?
I'm trying to quickly find it, but I believe it's under the definition of MR. It's in the schedule, but basically it says that the magistrate, individuals who are subject to MR, basically that the magistrate, trying to find it real fast, but basically the magistrate will set conditions, and that person, you know, until you hear back from the magistrate about the conditions, they're to be held under the schedule. So I'll see if I can find it maybe in between one of these questions, and I can come back to it. But basically that is what the schedule says. It's what the FAQ say as well. If it's not clear, then that's what it's supposed to be, and we'll try to clear it up if it's not there.
Hey,
Okay,
David,
thanks.
just for clarification on that, so say, for example, an MR is submitted within 2 hours and we don't hear back until arraignment, that person can be held without any consequences. Is that correct?
That's correct. One of the things that the sheriff's office asked for early on, and we're working on it, hopefully it'll be available to you all very soon, is an ability for you to see for your bookings when the magistrate, because there's an affirmative decision made by the magistrate that says temporarily hold this person until arraignment for further review. You all can't see that right now. You're seeing all the conditional releases, and we'd kind of said before, just hold them until you hear from us. And I know for some of you and your jailers, it's not really comfortable. What am I supposed to do with this person? So we're trying to make that available to you so you can see for your bookings, you know, what the ultimate decision was. But to your point, until you hear back from us, you are to hold them until arraignment. Unless you hear from probation a teletype that says on the MR, this person's conditionally released, at least under the bail schedule. Again, you all can do what you want from your own policies, but from the bail schedule perspective and the court's perspective, that person should be held till arraignment.
All right, next question is from the illustrious Thaddeus McCormick out of Lakewood. Does that mean cite and releases aren't eligible for elevation to magistrate review because there's no booking that starts the 2-hour clock? Do field officers have the discretion to book someone who has committed a CR offense?
Yeah. So anyone who's cited and released in the field, obviously we don't even know about it at the court side of things. It's, you know, from that perspective, if you want a cite and release, if you want to do bail deviation upward enhanced review of a cite and release, you need to book them because we wouldn't otherwise know about them. And that would, once you book them, that would start the 2-hour time frame. As the second answer to the question, obviously answered by my first response here is yes, there's a provision in the bail schedule which says nothing alters the law enforcement officer's ability to use their discretion to book and release to book or cite anyone. So even though it says CR on the bail schedule, nothing keeps you from booking that person to jail and then requesting magistrate review if you wish to do so.
Thanks. And before we go to the next question, I want to bring the sheriff back in because I know your time is very valuable, Sheriff. You're very busy, as are the chiefs. And of course, David, I'm sure you're busy too. But I want to talk a little bit about the efforts that you've taken on with the court, with David, with Chief Moore, to get kind of to this point, or at least very close to where we are now. I know you have had a lot of meetings, but I want to give credit to you because I think there's a lot of folks out there that kind of feel this just happened, or where we are today is just where the courts ended up. The way I understand it is there were numerous meetings where as the sheriff and the chief from the LAPD were the initial parties into this, that you guys had to make a lot of arguments to kind of get us to where we are. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that process, Sheriff?
Yes, thank you, Marcel. Chief Moore and I have met with Dave in the court behind the scenes at least 3 different times, but that was just for PARP. And I think for, and I may have just touched on this earlier, but it's worth repeating that Mike and I were involved in many other meetings in preparation for judges or Judge Riff's court in the preliminary injunction. And I think what started to happen is the majority of our community wasn't paying attention to the zero bail thing until the media started reporting on the Uquady case. And under the Uquady case, that's where I think a lot of confusion comes in, because that was zero bail. So a lot of the things that Dave's explaining that went into effect on October 1st were not the same conditions that we were under, that Mike and I were fighting very publicly and a lot behind the scenes. Because I'm going to tell you something, and I know that cities are concerned, and that's why I'm glad you're on this call, because worst case scenario, for those of you who have chosen to move forward with lawsuits, the worst thing that could happen for us at the Sheriff's Department is this PARP system somehow gets stopped, and then we go back to Judge Riff's order for the emergency bail schedule, which eliminates this risk assessment tool, which basically does put people back to zero bail. So that's the terminology gets confused between zero bail, the emergency bail schedule that was in effect under your Uquady, and now what Dave's talking about with PARP. It's 2 completely different items. And for me, I would much rather be where we're at today than where I was before October 1st. And if I had more time to explain both categories, you would feel the same way. So that's why we're having this meeting today, to make sure people understand that we cannot go backwards here. We're trying to move forward. And as both Darren and Scott indicated, there are some concerns. This is not perfect. Nothing is that is this sophisticated and technical. But as we move ahead, I know within the Sheriff's Department, a lot of our employees have questions. It sounds like 2 of the questions were from some of our employees. And I think as we educate people and it starts to work out, I think it will become better. But I have absolutely no doubt that we're going to run across significant challenges as well. And what I'm happy to report on is that we still have that open door with the judges, with David, where we're able to work things out. So if I have a case that's brought to me by one of our geographical stations and they're having an issue with a suspect or something that went wrong, we're asking them to bring it forward to us so we can bring it forward to the court and see, was it an anomaly or is it a structural thing that we can change? So this is still a work in progress. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But again, I would rather be here today than where I was before October 1st under that Uquady zero bail case. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Sheriff. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled questions. From Richard Padilla, can you give some examples of non-monetary conditions?
Yeah, so the non-monetary conditions are conditions which are made available by the county through the pretrial services that they provide through probation and through JCOD. So a couple of those, just to give you an example, obviously some of them are what we would sort of refer to as paper conditions. Don't commit new break the law, don't drive while under the influence, don't drive without a license. There are other ones such as reach out, contact the JCOD system. Ultimately, conditions that are available at arraignment include electronic monitoring and other more substantive conditions, but that's basically what's made available to the magistrates at the time of their decision.
All right, next one. Let's see. There is an example where an offender was arrested 4 times for lewd acts, and could have the magistrate reviewed that one?
Absolutely. Well, if the person met the criteria and for enhanced review, and the law enforcement officer made the request, that person, if they were in that criteria, could be reviewed by the magistrate. So it really starts with the call from the law enforcement officer to the magistrate.
Hey, David,
Probation.
I'm sorry, David, do you know if they were arrested all 4 times by the same agency?
They were not.
Because that makes a difference, right? So it looks like a certain chief or a certain individual, probably organization wasn't really doing their job. They may not have known they were arrested previous. So that's kind of a glitch in the system. And that's why everybody, in my opinion, should be doing booking and release versus cite and release, because that information isn't getting out to the other agencies. If they book and release, that might show up, right?
This person was booked all 4 times by 3 different agencies.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring that up in a bit, Chief, because you made another good point last week too, talking about the training and the necessary to get, you know, the folks that are actually coming in contact with these people to write this stuff up the right way, particularly folks that are in danger, right? When you have multiple times, you know, arrested, you hear all these stories in the news about people that are arrested multiple times for stealing cars, stealing catalytic converters. At some point, the concern here from our communities is, you know, when are they going to be held accountable, or when are we going to get these people off the street, because they're right back out doing what they've been arrested for so many times, right? And that's the huge concern, I think, in a lot of this. So next question is, what will the conditions be made available to the public upon release of the inmate?
So there's an order entered, a conditional release order entered in every single one of these cases when a person is released on conditions. That is provided to the law enforcement agency to then get the arrestee to sign that they will comply with the conditions. If they don't sign it, they're not eligible to be released on those conditions. So, but once that's signed, that document becomes a part of the public record. It goes to the DA's office. The DA's office then provides that to the court, so it becomes a part of the record. So it's available to the public upon release.
Great. Next question. You stated the probation department is available 24 hours a day. However, they are closed between 0100 and 0600 hours. A police officer attempted to call during their operating hours, but was put on hold for over an hour and gave up. That was something that kind of came up earlier, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, we verified with them when they're open and closed, so I'll reach out to them and see what the situation is. But I appreciate you letting me know about that.
All right. Based on what we heard today, the Superior Court will continue to look at data and make changes to the Superior Court continue to look at the data and make changes to the no bail schedule, the PARP.
Yes, thank you. Not the no bail schedule. We could change the terminology, everybody. That would be helpful, because I think our language is important in making sure that the public understands what we're actually doing. The last thing I think any of us want is for people to think there is no accountability, but we actually believe there's more accountability in the system than there was before. And ultimately, of course, the ultimate accountability is whenever the case goes to court for the final resolution. But basically, bottom line is that, yes, the court continues to look at this. We've said from the very beginning, we're committed to that. So we'll continue to make changes as necessary. We're trying not to change too much, because we know we don't want to create confusion among law enforcement, but there are necessary changes as we try to get this thing, where it's working really well. So there will continue to be some changes. Like I said, there's changes coming out to you probably today. And then probably again, I know there's already some things for next month that are likely to be modified, slight little tweaks to it, but we'll do our best. And please let us know if you have issues or concerns as well.
Great. Okay. This one is from Chris Roberts. Appreciate the group continuing to work on this and make adjustments. How long is the working period intended to be open, or has that been determined?
The working period, is that with regard to modifying the schedule? Is that what the question is?
I'm assuming, yeah. Like how often will the court continue to look at changes needed and review data to make sure that we're holding the right people that need to be held?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, we are regularly reviewing the data. We're going to release this data publicly. We're going to put it on our website so that you and the public will have access to it. You don't take our word for it. You can go look at it yourself. And so that will be coming at the end of the month because we'll have a month's worth of data at that point. So we are committed to making this work. As the sheriff said, we're moving forward. We're trying to make modifications as needed. We believe this system is better for public safety. There may still need to be some tweaks along the way, as we're seeing even now. I can't tell you that, you know, we only got 2 more months of changes to happen. We'll keep working on it and listening to you all and listening to the community and listening to, you know, all the different groups out there about how it's working and making changes where we need to. And obviously looking at the data. You know, hopefully in the past, the bail schedule has been updated once a year. But you know, until we get this sort of settled, I think it's probably going to see a number of other changes before we get to a point where it'll be more of an annual review after that.
Okay. All right.
So if I can jump in again, because I brought up the issues, right? We're right now, you're the portal for agencies. You're the have to be the problem solver on your end. And unfortunately, I'm the guy getting all the complaints on my end. I don't have time for that, nor do you.
Yeah.
Can we come to an agreement here that we'll have something put in place to where individual agencies can reach out and have a conversation, so it's not a telephone game back to these folks and it doesn't fall on my desk or your desk?
Yeah, we have the pre-arraignment protocol at lacourt.org email still open. And I don't think they're all calling you or me, because we're getting lots of emails in that portal. But I would say if people have issues or concerns, that's a good place to put them. You know, pre-arraignment protocol at lacourt.org. So that's the place to go.
David, might I suggest something along the lines of that, you know, with the Sheriff's Department, LAPD, and all of the local police departments, maybe something either maybe biannually, or something where you could actually get into a room and kind of hear them?
Happy.
Yeah, I think that
Happy to do that.
information goes a long way to solving, or at least figuring out, right, how to get past some of the issues that they're facing, whether it be waiting on hold for an hour to, you know, to get somebody on the phone in their early evening hours. That's a lot of stuff happens, you know, overnight.
Right.
So I think that that'll help a ton, right, to that kind of working group to get stuff figured out. Okay.
One of the things I was going to say at the end here, but it's worth saying here, which is, you know, we want to make it, you know, a couple of our judges were in Torrance yesterday. A couple of judges were in Beverly Hills a few weeks ago. So we're making ourselves available. We believe this is good for public safety. We believe there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of fear mongering happening by groups who are interested in causing chaos. And so we're trying to make sure the correct message gets out there. So, you know, certainly we're willing to meet with anyone. You know, whenever the sheriff reached out and asked, or I guess it was Chief Fairfield and the sheriff doing it about the same time, if I would participate in this, absolutely. I participated this morning in a meeting in one of our cities. So, you know, basically we want to make ourselves available. So if you or your city leaders or others are interested in hearing from us, please reach out. We'll make ourselves available as much as we can to come and help answer questions and listen to you and hear. It's important to us that the public have the truth and that the city leaders and police chiefs and individual deputies on the street understand how this works, so that they are well informed about how it's working.
Okay, good stuff. I think we're going to see a couple of questions here that are a little bit duplicative, so we'll just answer them lightly. So this next one I think has been answered a bit. For individuals being booked on MR, could you furnish us with some examples of the conditions a magistrate might order?
Yeah, I think I've answered that one already. So that's
okay. We'll skip on. And this is another one. Is probation and the magistrate available 24/7? We know probation is closed from 01 to 6.
Yeah, I don't think they're closed, but that causes me some concern, because I've literally asked this question 2 or 3 times, because at one point in our schedule it said they were closed from 1 to 6, and we've been informed multiple times they're open 24/7. So I need to re-verify that, and hearing that you're having issues reaching them during those hours causes me concern. The magistrate, I can assure you, because they work, you know, they're judges on our court. They are available 24/7, so they're definitely working 24 hours a day.
Okay, good stuff. And this one is, as for you, David, did you basically state a CR is basically BR or CR in the schedule?
Yeah, so probably from the perspective of you all, a CR is the same as a BR. If you book them into jail on a CR offense, it becomes a book and release offense. So probably the real answer to that is a CR becomes a BR when you book them, and you're absolutely entitled to do that.
So just because the bail schedule says it's a CR, they still have the option to take them in and fingerprint them and make sure that they're not doing other bad stuff in other jurisdictions.
That's correct. There's a specific statement in the schedule that states as much. Okay,
good stuff. All right, let's see. For the statistics provided in presentation, were 57 individuals rebooked in 2 weeks. And of those, 52 were rebooked in twice in 2 weeks. I think you guys have this in front of you. Were those individuals released without conditions? Were they all deemed no low risk despite being rebooked, or what? Is there a comparative data rebooking statistic prior to new system being implemented, trying to figure out the 90% twice rebooking rate?
Yeah, I don't understand the very last part of it, but I'll try to explain this. So it's a kind of a complicated look. What I will tell you is the majority, or I think it's almost half of them, almost the majority of them, were individuals who were booked originally on an offense which was a serious or violent offense, and bailed out with money bail, and then were rebooked during that 2-week period on some other offense. Some of them were cite and release or book at CR, BR offenses in there. And then some of them were individuals who the magistrate issued an order to hold them, and they ended up being released either by law enforcement before arraignment or at arraignment, and were rebooked. So it's a little bit complicated. I mean, I've got, examples. I looked at one here that was booked 3 times. They were booked on an offense that was a money bail offense. They got on a $100,000 bail, and then were rebooked again. All of this happened within 8 days. 3 offenses within 8 days. I could go on and on. I've got examples of all these different ones, but it looks as if again, I think the key part from our perspective of sort of looking at, is this working? Individuals there was that individualized review, not a single one of them, not one, was rebooked during a 2-week period. It's early. We got to keep watching that. But if you compare it with the other ways people were released, clearly people were released in other categories, even though there's not many of them being rebooked, at least in the first 2 weeks. The people who are being considered for their individualized risk and decisions made on that, none of them were rebooked in that 2-week period.
If I can just say something here real quick, let's not confuse rebooked with reoffend, right? Because these individuals aren't getting caught every time, right? And these 4 or 5 time rearrest, these guys are basically telling on themselves. They're going to these places, they're ludac, they're standing right there. Those are easy to be caught and to get rebooked. However, we know that we don't catch them every time. And so I just don't want everybody to get confused or be overwhelmed with this 57%, because that's just the people that are getting caught again. Doesn't mean there aren't more victims out there and on these individuals.
Understood. I assume that would be the way it was before the PARP as well. And before, so I mean, obviously, we're only able to capture where bookings occur.
Okay, this is from an anonymous attendee. Does the name of the magistrate who releases or holds an MR, is their name listed on the decision? Is it available to the arresting agency?
The order that is issued by the judge is a valid court order, which is signed by a magistrate. So that information is available on that individual order.
Okay, and for offenses that are listed as MR in the bail schedule, does a request still need to be made within the 2-hour window?
Perfect. Yeah, let's not get everybody confused there. You do not need to request magistrate review on offenses which are designated as MR. That will happen automatically. If you have information that you think that the magistrate ought to know that might help them in making that determination, you absolutely can call that in just to provide additional information. But the actual magistrate review will happen on every MR. And so the only ones you're really looking at are the CRs and BRs.
So did I hear you correct, David? So an arresting officer can call in the additional information. They don't have to write it out. So it's a lot quicker process to get to the magistrate. That's correct.
Okay. So on the CRs, BRs, or any MRs where you're providing additional information, it's just a call. Basically, the way the law works is it requires that to be provided orally or in writing, and to try to make it as sort of stick with the way we've always done it. Those have always been taken orally. So we're doing that on a serious and violent offense where you are seeking a bail deviation. So they'll say their money bail is $100,000, and you as law enforcement want to increase it based on certain factors. That is required by statute to be in writing. So on those serious and violent offenses, not under the PARP, like the old way of always doing it, those have always needed to be done in writing. They continue to be done in writing. And probation would advise your officers that if they were to seek a bail deviation on a money bail offense, to put that in writing.
Okay, this next one's a comment, but I want to go to Brian Psyche, city manager for Whittier, raise his hand. So I'm going to let him. So you're going to be able to ask your question. There you are, Brian. So you just need to unmute and you can go ahead and ask your question if you want to, or you can type it in. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll come back to you, Brian. Okay, so this is a comment from Thaddeus McCormick. It says more of a comment than a question. Our main concern is that bail determinations shall hold the public's safety as a primary concern. To the extent that we are being told that our concerns are misplaced because there's more discretion afforded our law enforcement personnel than first thought, I think it's not enough to fully allay our concerns. Relying on case by case discretion exercised or not in the field will necessarily lead to threats falling through the cracks, especially given the vastness of LA County. The discretion we are talking about needs to be clearly codified and standardized, and we really should have before the protocols were implemented. We shouldn't be figuring out as we go with the public safety at stake. Anybody want to comment on that? Or
I mean, you know what? I'll add a few things to that statement, which is I hope no one thinks that that public safety is not something that's really important to the courts. It's what the courts do every day as well. It's part of the charge under the Constitution and laws for them to consider that as part of bail. So it's not as if the court has not been considering that, and it's actually the reason why we've made this change. The old system was not safe. It was not proven. There's plenty of studies out there in our own county, our own state, as well as around the country, showing that the old system did not work. So we've tried to make efforts to improve that. The reason why, quite frankly, there wasn't a public comment period is because the law requires the Superior Court judges to issue this bail schedule, and that's the way it happens. It's not the way other public comment works. They did this, by the way, issued in July, implemented in October. I understand some people might say that's not very long, but we tried really hard in the intervening period to make it ourselves available to people. I know that doesn't, once it finally gets here, everybody starts paying more attention to it. But the process worked as it's required by statute. I think what we would say is that for the most part, there have not been any significant changes since July. They've been pretty minor technical changes or just clarifications, and that's what we continue to have. The system that we put in place in July was based upon a lot of years of piloting and testing things, and we still feel like it's the one that improves public safety the most.
okay, for this next one, the first part I think you already answered as far as making changes, but it says, has the court reached out to the group of cities who are currently engaged in a lawsuit? And I know that number of cities is growing. Has the court reached out to the group of cities who have sued to discuss and try to address their concerns?
Because I'm a named defendant in a lawsuit, I'm not allowed to discuss pending litigation for obvious reasons. We've tried to make the information that I'm sharing with you today available. I assume some of the cities may be listening in to that, but I think we have a hearing in November. So we have a lawyer that they're talking. So beyond that, that's pretty much all I can say. Okay,
good stuff. Let's see. Are you a judge?
No, I just got a promotion.
It says you say Mr. Slayton says that bail can be adjusted at arraignment, but assumes that the defendant will appear at arraignment and released. And for those who show up, case law requires that a judge at arraignment cannot change the bail unless there is a change in circumstances since the zero monetary bail was set. So how is it that prosecutors will be able to legally address these issues, especially when there is a release by magistrate and the prosecutor does not know what the magistrate considered before release, either with low bail or no cash bail?
So basically nothing has changed at arraignment. The same thing that was the case before is the same case now, which is an individual judge at arraignment reconsiders the bail decision that was made pre-arraignment. So that nothing about the PARPs changed that. So that process would continue as it's always been.
So what we're talking about, the PARP, is basically from the time someone is arrested until the time they're arraigned. What's the ideal time and what's the actual time that normally takes?
So basically the way that works by statute, the arraignment occurs within 48 hours, not counting certain days, weekends and holidays. So that if someone remains in custody, it's 48 hours. If the case isn't filed in that 48 hours, that person is generally released. So obviously, the case has to be filed during that period of time. With a person that's released from custody pre-arraignment, I believe the current cite back date is 30 days. The court has expressed openly and publicly its willingness to shorten that time frame. Part of the challenge there is getting the case filed. So clearly, by the time a person comes back to court, there needs to be a case. Right now, that's 30 days because of the feeling that both law enforcement and the prosecutors need that period of time to get the case filed. If law enforcement and prosecutors were willing to file those cases faster, the court is willing to speed up arraignment on either a certain class of offenses or all of them. Our judges are here and ready. It might be difficult for the first couple of weeks while we're making the sort of double or triple arraignments in one day, but we would certainly welcome that. But at least at this point, it's currently 30 days, I believe, on the side back time frame.
All right, I got a shout out here. I'm not going to read it, but that was nice. Thanks for setting us up. Let's see. Next one is, were law enforcement agencies involved in the original meetings regarding these schedules outside of the Rakiti litigation? If so, which ones?
So a couple of things. One, just to be clear, I know the press has reported this differently than what we would say. We were working on this before Arkiti's injunction, other things. So this is not in response to Arkiti, despite the fact that it appears as if it may be that way. With regard to agencies being involved in the original meetings, it's a little complicated for people on the outside to understand, but there are 582 judicial officers on the bench, and the local rules of the court require that the bail committee make a recommendation to the executive committee, and that the executive committee's decision becomes the decision of the court. I can't change it by myself. Judge Jessner, the presiding judge, can't change it by herself. Judge Tapia, the assistant presiding judge, can't change it by himself. There's a process of committees. So that committee is required statutorily to come up with a bail schedule. And so the committee was required to meet and deliberate and come up with it. And until that decision was made for the court by the executive committee, there was nothing to talk about. And so once, as you all know, you all got an invitation within 1 week of the decision being made, where we said, come talk about it. Let's hear from you. We opened up an email that day and said, please let us know about any issues. And we were monitoring and responding to emails from July 25th, I believe, all the way till today. So that there has been involvement. We've heard from you, as the sheriff's already mentioned. He and Chief Moore and Chief Fairfield, Chief Harris from Pasadena, a number of folks reached out to us, and I don't believe we've turned down a single meeting requested by pretty much anyone, but certainly not from law enforcement.
So I'm going to go down. So I found Brian's comment here in the questions, but he says this is more of a comment than a question. What many of us on the call today are concerned with is the lack of communication prior to the bail schedule being implemented. Decisions were being made for the entire county based on conversations with only a select few individuals. We need to have more conversations like this to take place well in advance of these types of decisions. So this is what I was talking about earlier. I think there's folks in general, relatively speaking, the county isn't always the best at communicating with cities about everything and anything from Project Room Key all the way down to this here. So the suggestion that I made, I think it will go a long way to not only keep people informed, but make them feel like they're being heard. Make sure that their voices are being part of the solution for this. It's a very difficult situation, as you can tell. It's, a lot of people are concerned. Bunch of cities are suing, because they're concerned. So that's just a suggestion. If you have anything to add to that, David.
Nothing more than what I've said. I mean, I've already explained kind of the process here about how it works internally, about getting amendments made to the bail schedule. I'll just remind everyone, you all got notice of this the day that it was adopted by the court. Within, I think, an hour and a half of it being finally adopted, you all had that in your mailbox. And we had a meeting with you in person 1 week later. Pretty much all law enforcement agencies across the county attended that. And then we opened up an opportunity to communicate after that. So, to the degree there wasn't more communication, sure, we'd love to have better and more communication. Hopefully that would have maybe helped with some of the confusion, but we were trying our best to make sure we had that line of communication, and perhaps we could have been better, but I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, he's dismissing the question.
Hey, real quick, Dave, if I could jump in, something that I haven't heard you say today, but I know it's happened in the past. Maybe explaining to our audience that this is something the court does like once a year.
Yeah.
This is just the first time it's getting this much attention.
Yeah, the court has been required to do this for decades under the law to adopt a uniform bail schedule countywide. And as the sheriff just pointed out, we followed the same process this time we've always followed. Obviously there's, as the sheriff mentioned, there's a lot more interest this time around, but you're right. It is something that the court has done, continues to do. We're continuing to make modifications using the same process. That's the process we've done.
Okay, this next one is from John Moreno, the city manager in the city of Paramount, and he's right. And we talked about this already. Messaging is key. Can the courts? This is a great idea. I think if you guys were to develop a simple to read, one-page public information piece that can be distributed to our communities, I think that's an excellent, like an information, we call it a one-pager, or an infographic that shows the difference, that corrects the term no bail. I think that's going to go a long way to get people to sort of change their frame of mind over what this really is.
It's a good suggestion.
John's a smart guy. Let's see. This is okay. If a person is arrested for a theft charge or any minor misdemeanor and the magistrate decides to hold them for arraignment, they cannot bail out. However, if you commit a violent felony such as domestic violence or murder, a cash bail amount is set and they can bail out. That's more of a statement, I think. Is that
that's correct? And that's a correct statement.
Okay. Let's see. Felony battery on a custody officer, 243.1. This is obviously someone who knows the laws. Is a book and release. So if a custody officer gets assaulted, the inmate is cited out. There's no provision that if an arrestee is out on zero bail, they cannot be released again under zero bail.
Yeah, so I think again all those statements are accurate. Again, on the 243.1, I haven't looked at the bail schedule, so I don't know if that's right, but I'll take Batista's comment as truth. Obviously, if there's concern about risk to public safety or to failure to appear, that person could request magistrate review, and the magistrate would take a look at that individual based upon their risk and set bail accordingly. With regard to, and this is important, an arrestee being out on zero bail and not being able to be released again. Again, I'll maybe ask to change the terminology a little bit here, but if they're out, if they've been booked and released or cited and released after being booked, and they commit a new offense, here's the facts. The fact is that when someone is arrested and released, cited and released, or booked and released and no case is filed, the court is unaware of it. Until the case is filed, we don't know it exists. So I know under the EBS, for instance, there was a repeat offenders exception. Unless someone were to call us and tell us about that, we don't even know about it. Once the case is filed, as you saw in the screenshot I showed you, we know about it then. So a repeat arrestee or repeat releasee, however you want to look at it, exception is really just words on the paper. One of the things that we were really trying to do was be honest here and say, if law enforcement has concerns because someone, for instance, is a repeat offender and they believe that is a enhanced risk to public safety or enhanced risk of flight, let us know, please. We would love to. I know one thing I've found in all my years of working with judges is they love information with which they can make better decisions. So we are, as we said back on July 25th when we met with you, please share that information with us. It would be helpful. The way to make that meaningful, if you're concerned about someone who has been booked and released, cited and released, even released on conditions, that person goes out and you arrest them and book them for committing another offense, I would ask that you let the magistrate know about that. They would find that information helpful. I don't know what the magistrate will do with that information. Can't promise anything, but I know they would appreciate knowing about it.
All right, we're getting to the end of our time here. We're going to take, let's do 3 more questions. I'll kind of go through here, and then we'll get you guys to have some closing statements. I think we covered a ton of stuff today. I want to thank all of you, there's 7 of you, again, for taking the time to really have this conversation, get the information. I think it's imperative that we share that not only the latest information, but the most accurate information. And I do agree that there's been a lot, I've heard a lot from various groups. It's just from my conversations with the sheriff and conversations with the chiefs, it's not correct. It's a perception, which is great. People, live off of their perceptions. Their perception is a reality in a lot of cases. But we want to make sure that we're getting the most accurate information out to our communities. Okay, this one's from B. Derringer. This new system was launched in part based on the claim that presumptive bail was legally unfair to people who don't have money. But why would the court enact a system in which everyone, even those who can afford bail, are released with no cash bail for the majority of criminal offenses, even though they can ask for a bail reduction at arraignment?
Well, I think the statement's just false. First of all, that's not what we're doing. So individuals who, sure, the previous system was found to be unconstitutional for people who didn't have money. It was found to be a violation of equal protection, that those who had money could get out and those who didn't couldn't, just as was stated just a few minutes ago by Batista. The system we have now does not automatically release people with no bail for a majority of crimes. In fact, I showed the data earlier in the presentation, which showed the actual opposite of that. It actually showed that more people were being held or more people were being released based upon their risk to the community and risk to victims, not based upon their access to money. The only places where money is an issue now are in serious violent offenses, which may or may not be their ultimate policy. It is what we have for today based upon the law. But I just think the statement is false. And so I would just reject everything about it to say that we're not doing that. It's based upon individuals being reviewed based upon their risk and then being held or released based upon that risk, not based upon any other factors.
All right, let's see. Let's skip around here a little bit. I want to go to this from Gary Boyer. Is there data to the percentage of arrestees that appear in court voluntarily after release? I know you only have a few weeks of data currently.
Yeah, we'll be watching that. I mean, obviously, a key piece of this, one of the goals is to, one of those constitutional responsibilities of the judges is to consider people not appearing at court. So it's one of the primary. It's actually originally the primary purpose of bail. It's now also public and victim safety. But so we'll be watching that. As you said, for those who were released, they were probably cited back in 30 days. So we're not there yet. So we as you can see, we are collecting a lot of data. We'll be watching that and seeing what the impact is.
Okay, and this will be the last question before we close out and go to some final closing comments for all of you. Are people being released based on jail population?
No. The court's obligation has nothing to do with jail population. That's the sheriff's responsibility in the county, and each of you as chiefs to manage your own jail populations. The court's obligation, constitutionally and statutorily, is to make decisions based upon the two factors stated: risk of failure to appear and risk of risk to the community and the victim. That's it. Not that we're not a part of the community, but that's certainly not a decision that's driving any decisions that the court's making with regard to jail population.
Thank you, David. I want to thank you all once again. I have a quick question, and this is for the law enforcement agencies. First, I'll start with you, Sheriff, and it's the same question to all of you. This obviously is going to require, and I heard Chief Fairfield say this last week, this is going to require a ton of training to your folks that are in the field, that are making contact with bad guys and bad women and bad everybody. What is the plan? Is there a plan? How heavy is that lift, Sheriff, from your perspective in the department, to get this out to everybody, to make sure that your deputies out there know that they have 2 hours, if they have an enhancement, or if they need to request a magistrate review for multiple arrests, even outside of the sheriff's department jurisdiction? How big a lift do you see getting this information to your folks out in the field through your station captains and everywhere else?
Well, it's absolutely a significant effort, and it's continuous, especially since this has been implemented, because we're finding as we use our normal communication channels, this, as stated earlier, it is a little bit more complex. And we want to make sure that all of our field deputies and our custody folks understand the options that they have. Because understanding a lot of the concerns and questions that have come up, it's really based, and it puts a lot of onus on those two sets of employees that they do everything right. So we will continue to educate. We've identified a group of subject matter experts within our custody division that are going around on field trips to every inch of the county, And we'll continue to do that, but it is an ongoing effort. And then just going back to the earlier question about depopulation, I don't know if we as a department have always done a really good job of explaining the 4 consent decrees we have in our custody division. And we are constantly, it's an everyday effort to make sure that we're not releasing the most dangerous people, but we are releasing those with a lower risk assessment to them, because we have to keep our population at a certain level for the county jails. So that's an ongoing effort. And when we have our contract city meetings, we usually make sure that we cover that during our meetings as well.
Yeah, we appreciate you, Sheriff. We appreciate you keeping us updated. Okay, Chief Fairfield and Arikawa, can you tell us what are your efforts from a local PD perspective?
Yeah, I'll tell you that it is a heavy lift. I've been very involved in these conversations now for at least the last 3-4 weeks, right? Trying to get a good understanding of it, trying to push it down, and we've messed up 2 times already, right? So we've released people that we probably, at a minimum, should have done magistrate reviews on, and we did not. I think it has a lot to do with the confusion from the original no bail to where we're at today. I think it has a lot to do with what is a violent crime. I think, some of the other issues with warrants and some of the enhancements that we're talking about, there's a lot of things that play into this, and it's not very easy to write an email and explain. So like the sheriff said, the traditional means of some of the training and passing along information doesn't work. So we're working on it daily, trying to get it better.
Chief Arikawa?
Yeah, so I have a lieutenant that oversees the custody staff, and we're starting there, kind of working backwards. But again, as David had mentioned, this was imposed on us. This is not something that we had a voice at the table to have some input. So I learned something today. There's some changes today. So with this fluid document and this procedure occurring, it's going to take a while for us to figure this thing out. But it is starting with the custody staff and our lieutenant that oversees a jail. And we're going to do the very best we can. But yeah, we're having a hard time selling it. I know David said that it's not a no bail. There's conditions attached. That's just, I think that's a hard sell. I think the courts need to stick to that, but it's hard for us to tell our community that it's no bail, because it is no bail. They're not required to post bail. So those are some of the things that we're working with, just kind of the perception part of it, and then the operational part of it. We're really trying to work our way through this. We'll get there at some point in time. But
Yeah.
one of the questions that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned from another chief is that we did say that it's probably meaningful if we probably get together periodically with the courts and just kind of look at this whole thing as a system, seeing what works, what doesn't work. Maybe set up some scheduled meetings, but also there's going to be occasions where something pretty big happens, and I think we want to be able to have access to the courts to try to iron out those particular things. So if David's open to that, I think that's going to be important for us to take back to the chiefs.
I think he's trying to get to the mute button.
Oh, no, I'm definitely sorry.
I thought you were waiting to say something. Okay, so as we start to wrap up here, I want to go around the room. I want to give each of you an opportunity to give us some final thoughts, kind of, your thoughts on what we talked about, what some of the cities that are looking at this. Obviously, every city that's on the call right now, and I know there's a bunch of law enforcement folks as well, public safety is the #1 concern. It's a #1 priority, anywhere from retail theft to catalytic converter thefts to home burglaries to, just overall public safety, right? We want to make sure that residents feel safe in their communities. And sometimes when stuff like this comes out, it makes it a little more difficult, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us, one, to make sure that we have accurate information out there to the communities, but two, that we support our law enforcement partners to make sure that they're able to do their jobs. So from our perspective, Sheriff, and even for the local PDs, if there's money that you need for training, we will support you. We will back you through the county, through the state, whatever it takes, because again, this is a whole kind of retraining. You got to train your folks to rethink kind of how they're interacting with folks and what they're going to do after the arrest, right? To make sure that they're keeping the community safe. And I know it can be frustrating for a lot of folks that are out there, but we want you to know that we have your back. We support you. We want to make sure you're keeping our community safe, but also that you're able to be safe too. You're not letting out people that are going to pose a risk to you or the community. So any final thoughts before we head out? David, you're first.
No, I think just thank you all for being here. I hope you know a little bit more than when you came in today, and know that we're definitely working to make this be the best system it can be. We again think that the data would show, as the decisions, the reason why we made them, that this is an improvement to public safety, victim safety, and hopefully increasing people showing up to court as intended. So, and that people are not being held or released simply based on their money. So thank you all for all of your work on it. Again, I would just re-offer again that if anyone has further questions or needs one of us from the court to come and visit with some group that you think would be helpful, please reach out to us. You've got the email address. We gave it to you earlier. Happy to see what we can do to make someone available, either myself or someone else, to do that. But thank you all for your work you do every day, and thanks for continuing to work with us on this.
Thanks, David. Chief Arikawa.
Well, it's always nice to have the sheriff with us, with LA County chiefs, and getting the judge in the same room. This is, we learn something a little bit more each and every time that we have these meetings. So I appreciate that. I do know that in talking to some of the other chiefs, that our goal is to make sure that the community feels like there's safety and security. And this is probably where we need to do a lot of work to ensure our communities that we're trying to get this thing right. But I appreciate being involved in the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Fairfield. Can't hear you.
I knew it was going to happen at least once. Much of what Darren said, we appreciate that we have a seat at the table, and that's kind of the message we've taken back to the chiefs. I know David said that we were at the table, or at the beginning we weren't at the table, and that was frustrating for the chiefs, right? He did send an email, and then we all went there and we heard what it was. We didn't have any say in the process. We didn't have any discussions leading up to that. So we weren't always at the table, but I will tell you, over the last 3-4 weeks, maybe even a little longer, we have been at the table, and we're appreciative for that. I will also clear one thing up with David. I don't think it's the chiefs that are unwilling to file within we'll take that 2-week court time, right? We'll get them filed in 2 weeks. I think it's the DA that has the issue with moving those through, and just because of the mere number. But I think your law enforcement folks are willing to do it, whatever it takes, to get these people back to court before or a few of them pile up multiple offenses. So we'd be more than willing to work with you guys on that. To the group and to everybody, I put out to LA County chiefs that my department, as well as I believe Darren's department, will do booking and release. We will not do cite and release unless it's some sort of medical issue or special circumstances. There's 2 reasons for that. Obviously, it gets in the system. Secondly, it enters their fingerprints into LACRIS, which provides opportunities to solve past crimes and future crimes with those fingerprints. So we think it's important that we book and release. And then that's all I got. I appreciate everybody, and again, it isn't perfect, right? And it's not where we want it as chiefs, but I think that with open dialogue and conversation as we move forward, that we can definitely improve upon the system. So thank you to everybody.
Thanks, Chief. Over to you, Sheriff.
You know what? It was a good discussion. Dave, thank you so much for jumping on, because you got 99% of the questions. I appreciate you. You're up in the corner in the boxing ring there. But you know what? I'm actually excited about this one topic, and all of you may think I'm a little crazy. I can't remember the last time we were able to get an audience to talk about public safety, to talk about crime, and the concern about accountability for individuals that we're arresting. Because honestly, for us in policing, we've been yelling at the top of the mountain for the last, I want to say at least a decade, that there's some challenges out there. We We continuously need to talk about victims, and the system is more suspect oriented. So the fact that we're here and we're having these discussions, they cannot stop. So I am looking forward to other conversations with this entire group. We will be having other conversations with the leadership of LA County Chiefs and our partners over in the court, because there will need to be adjustments. And then the last request I have for everybody is, if you do hear of stories where you have either habitual criminals or incidences where the system is not working, please get it to us immediately. But do us a favor, get us a name, a date, and a time, and where it occurred. Because then it'll give us the ability to go right back to the problem area and either fix it, or find somebody who fixes it, or be honest with everybody and say, hey, this isn't working. And that's what we need, because we get rumors going about crazy things happening. And then it just gets us going in a direction that none of us need to go in. So anyways, I appreciate all of you being on this call and excited about the fact we're on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I want to invite all of you that are on this webinar today to our annual conference in May and do a follow-up conversation and see where the data shows in May of next year. That'll be some time, 7 or 8 months or so, or 9-ish months and from the time it was implemented, or 7 months or so, to really look at and kind of see where we are, see if it's working, see what's not working, and continue this conversation. I think this is a more than one occasion conversation. So thank you, David, both chiefs, sheriff, and everyone there. Sergio was down at our fall summit, and I think we know a whole bunch more now about the PARP. We're not going to call it Nobel anymore, even though Chief Arikawa might, but we're trying not to call it Nobel. We'll call it the PARP, right? To try to at least not call it that. But thank you all for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. Those of you who logged in, jumped on today to listen to this very important topic, thank you for taking the time. We have our board of directors meeting tonight, but I know there's also an ALADS DAs forum tonight in industry, or I think it's an industry, yeah. So wherever you find yourselves tonight, get there safely, get home safely. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you guys once again for being here. We'll see you next time.